fellow listeners around the world, as another episode of Heart of Gold, brought to you by bcgold.com and Gulf Island Radio, gets underway. Well, since last week, we've had ourselves an amazing turn of events in the UK. As you most all know, the United Kingdom has decided by a very slim margin to bail from the economic union with Europe and go it on their own. That's Big Davy G in the background there. This is a live broadcast of Heart of Gold, the show that tries to make sense of the present, the past, and the future of prospecting and mineral development and exploration in the provinces of British Columbia and the Yukon, with a tip of the hat to discoveries started out in California at Mr. Sutter's sawmill. As I explained to you last week, Mr. Sutter inadvertently bought the right piece of property at the right time. This was property previously owned by the Russian-American Fur Trading Company, bought on a whim, I guess, to act as a wintering headquarters further south in warmer climes for their sealers, whalers, and fishermen normally working up in the cold Alaska waters. Well, Mr. Sutter's property turned out to be very providential, as it was where gold was discovered in California in 1848. And by 1849, the rush was on. As I explained to you last week, people came from all around the world to join in on the gold rush in California. Never before had gold, or anything for that matter of value, been available to the general people, the population of the country and other countries. It was usually the domain of the king or queen of the country, and you would be probably hung if you tried to take some for yourself. So this was a whole new deal, and people were hungry. They wanted to get ahead. California had not yet become a territory. It was 3 days after the discovery when the announcement of the Territory of California was made. It was 4 months after the discovery before news got back to St. Louis by mule train by newspaper from Mr. Sam Brannan. Well, it went all right the first year. As I say, people came from all around the world. They crowded San Francisco Harbor with ships of all kinds, and they came from every country. They all worked well and hard together the first season, but by the second season, pickings were getting a little harder to get, and the Americans, who had only just recently taken over the Territory of California, decided that gold was best in American hands and others from other countries should not be allowed to take it. Well, this caused a great deal of trouble on the gold fields. There were miners who were chased off at the point of a knife or gun or murdered if they didn't leave. Mexicans, Chileans, people from anywhere but American heritage. That didn't seem to stop the Americans from wanting to come north, however, when not very much later, word of gold up in Canada got through to San Francisco. Well, all those crummy old boats that had brought the 49ers to California from all parts of the globe were suddenly pulled off the mud flats and hastily readied to come up the coast to Victoria and the Fraser River. Many of them did not make it, and many people went down with these ships. They were in such poor condition long before they came to San Francisco in the first rush, much less try to go out to sea in the second rush. And the weather out there between San Francisco and Juan de Fuca can be devastating. I'm talking seas so large, 200 feet above sea level, 6-inch thick lighthouse glass smashed by waves on the Oregon coast. Waves and seas and wind so fierce that it would take a ship virtually in new condition, shred the sails, tear the masts out of these big ships by the roots, even though they were held with all the rigging, throw them overboard and leave these ships a total sunken wreck, just barely hanging on to the surface, if at all. And this was the fury of the Pacific Northwest. And, of course, the rush was on. People didn't care about what season it was. They just wanted to get north and be first to get into good ground and stake some of it for themselves. And these were the risks they took. And now Vancouver Island was just getting to be explored by the British, but I mean barely. They had granted the territory of Vancouver Island to the Hudson's Bay Company, and after a fairly inconspicuous start with Fort Victoria moving aside some of the local natives and making room on the Songhees lands there for their activities, we got underway with what they called the Vancouver Island Expedition, an exploration of Vancouver Island from top to bottom. Governor Douglas wanted to know just what it was he had in his hands. And the Hudson's Bay Company was doing that because they really wanted it all for themselves. The charter was specifically designed to have the Hudson's Bay Company grant tracts of land to settlers as they came to Vancouver Island, but the only settlers that got much land from the Hudson's Bay Company turned out to be employees of the company themselves, and in fact even employees of an American company that was owned by all the players that were involved with Hudson's Bay at Fort Victoria. So the good land in the southern part of the island had all been grabbed by the Hudson's Bay and their employees. And I know of one family emigrated from Germany, a story long ago told in the Raincoast Chronicles, made it over to Victoria, coming from Europe, long way around, no doubt, and were told at Victoria that their land lay to the south of Cape Cox, which, if you know Vancouver Island, is the northwest tip of Vancouver Island, just above Quatsino Sound, in a little place called San Joseph Bay. Now, these folks had to make their way up there. They had to hack any kind of existence they were to enjoy out of the wilderness with their bare hands, no help from the government whatsoever. The governor sent this family to the furthest flung, most hellish region of the province he could think of to get them out of the way of them in Victoria. So this was their settlement effort, and finally the British government said, this isn't working out too well. So the Hudson's Bay Company lost the charter for Vancouver Island, and more sincere settlement was undertaken. Now, the 1849 California gold rush didn't last all that long, and at the same time, in British Columbia, as early as probably 1850, gold had been found up in the Queen Charlotte Islands. Not that much happened at that particular time. There were discoveries a couple of years later up in the Thompson River area, up the Fraser River, but the natives up that way were pretty hostile. In fact, you didn't want to go there. It was not a good idea, and many miners found that out. It's also a very treacherous river where the Thompson meets the Fraser, and there are miners and the miners' pokes still on the bottom in that vicinity after having tried to get out of town on a raft or a canoe with their pokes and not making it through the rapids. Population of Vancouver Island at the beginning of the rush from San Francisco jumped to almost, double, 225,000 to 450 in a single day, and was up over 5,000 within a month. Now you can imagine the consternation the governor is looking at, mostly Americans coming to work the gold fields. Now, as I said, the Americans had a problem with anybody else coming to their gold fields, but they had no problem coming to ours. And the border was not defined at that time. So the governor, James Douglas, claimed ownership of the gold fields in the name of the Crown and enacted a miner's license system and began to enforce his law. And you had to buy a license in Victoria, 10 shillings a month, and you could stake a claim 12 feet by 12 feet. So 4 meters by 4 meters. Very small. Nowadays you can stake a claim quite a bit larger unless you're up in the very north end of the province where the grid lines get a little closer together and claims are smaller. Typically down in the southern part of British Columbia here, claims are just a little over 50 acres per cell, they call them. Each claim is called a cell. Now, by 1860, the Caribou gold fields started to gather some attention. The Fraser River, of course, had been leading them up the river, and there were many placer deposits being worked along the Fraser River, up north of Lillooet, the Thompson River, and then, of course, in the Stikine, way far north, up north of Rupert, and the Kootenays, and even Leech River in 1864. There was the Omineeka and Cassiar District, 1872, and Cassiar District still going strong today. There's a nice claim that bcgold.com has for sale right now up in the Cassiar District, and this is the area where all the shows on TV are getting those crazy hauls of gold. Now, so the gold rush is progressing, and an awful lot of people are arriving here, but there isn't really any law. I mean, Governor Douglas was attempting to create some law, but we really needed some help. It was the 1830s when the ship Otter and the ship Beaver, the SS Beaver, came to the west coast via the Cape and a long, arduous journey. And the Beaver actually sailed all the way. She was a renowned wood hog. You had to cut cordwood, for 3 or 4 days, a 10-man crew, to feed the hungry boilers of the Beaver for 1 day. So the Beaver was often seen tied up along the coast here and there, and all the crew ashore cutting wood. Just betcha they hated that boat. The Beaver wound up, by the way, on Stanley Park shores, thrown up by the riptides underneath the First Narrows Alliance Gate Bridge. Eventually, after many, over 50 years of service in the 1880s, she wound up lodged on the rocks, just not far from, between Siwash Rock and Prospect Point. And many stories told of the Beaver, but that's for another time. Now, the question about prospecting these days as opposed to back when. Well, back when, the country didn't have stores, pretty much. It was all rural, very few towns, let alone cities. Infrastructure had only just begun, so in order to get goods and things, you were in the wrong place. You had to make what you needed or bring it with you. And of course, you've heard stories about the prospectors going up to the Klondike and going up over the Chilkoot Pass. The RCMP by that time had gotten themselves set up at the top of the pass because so many Americans were coming up and bringing guns and causing trouble that there had to be some kind of law. So they decided each miner had to bring 2,000 pounds of foods to the Chilkoot Pass and up into the Yukon if they were going to go that route, because otherwise they would have to get their food from somebody who probably didn't want to let them have their food, if you get my meaning. There was theft, there was murder, so the 2,000-pound rule came into effect. And if you've ever seen the pictures of the Chilkoot Pass at that time, each man was pulling 100 pounds up the pass on his back. It was a very steep, icy field, all the way up to the top, 1,000, 1,500 feet, a long ways. And so for days, these guys packed 100-pound packs on their backs up over the pass. The line of men looked like ants going up. And when they got the final amount, the last 100-pound pack of their 2,000 pounds of provisions to the top, then the RCMP would inspect their goods and allow them to continue. Now, of course, all the way to the Yukon, they had to continue packing that 2,000 pounds of supplies. So it was 100 pounds at a time, and you'd move your gear forward down the trail a certain distance, put your stuff down, go back, get more. So in a day, you can imagine, they weren't traveling very far, and this is not what you call traveling light. But as I say, up in the Yukon back then, there was nowhere for respite. You couldn't find anywhere you could buy food or get in shelter for the night unless you made it for yourself. So this was simply to protect the lives of the miners, and off they go. Many times we didn't have outfitters that sold really great clothes back then. They were barely getting into figuring out that Levi's were pretty good if you made them out of sailcloth. Boots weren't what they are today, of course. Rubber was not common, and your feet were probably going to be the first thing to go on that trail. If you even made it up to the gold fields, if your feet were still in good shape, you were probably a lucky cat. As soon as you got to the gold fields, of course, you're standing in water all day long, and you know what happens then. So most of the evening, these fellows were around a little campfire in a little tiny hut, designed that way because they didn't have much firewood, and that would keep warm easier than a big place. And they'd be drying their clothes. Half the day they'd be getting them wet, the other half of the day they'd be drying them out. They were a pretty rough bunch. Today, of course, we've got all kinds of places that sell great clothing for going out, and you can equip the kids even at the thrift store with pretty good stuff, and off you go out for a day or a weekend of doing some prospecting with your pan and your sluice box and your shovel, and you have a little contest to see who comes up with what, and at the end of the day everybody shows their little finds. And as I said in previous show, I think it's good family entertainment. It's a good way to stay in shape and get to see the province, which is a wonderful place, I assure you. Disney World? Nah, come on. Your kids deserve better than that. Teach them something important, how to recognize certain things out in the countryside, like whether those things are going to sting you if you step in them or sit on them, thistles, nettles, gorse, etc. Things that bite. There are things that bite in this province in various places, depending on where you are. We have quite a desert up in the interior that's good for little creepy crawly things, etc. But basically, safe to go out in the woods these days, and it's a lot of fun because, unlike what the guys went through in the old days, you can actually drive to a lot of these places. You can see for yourself what these fellows took weeks and weeks and weeks to get to in the matter of half an hour or an hour, just traveling the back roads. And I promise you, once you get started, you're going to want to go back. And that's what prospecting's all about. Rock hounding and prospecting, it's not just about the rocks, it's not just about the prospecting. It's the journey and the fun that comes with being with your friends and being outside, getting some healthy fresh air, getting some good exercise. And you know what? Every once in a while, people do get lucky. You got lots of ground out here too. Nowadays, of course, the claims on the rivers in British Columbia are numerous. There's hardly a creek in British Columbia that doesn't have claims from top to bottom. So there are recreational areas set aside by the province, which you can go online and find, where you can go and have fun and do some camping with your kids, and you don't have to worry about getting serious and getting a claim. On the other hand, there are areas, once you get in there, where you may think to yourself, I wonder what it takes to get a piece of ground out here. And that's where you wind up getting more familiar with the British Columbia mineral titles online situation, which leads you into the wonderful world of staking claims online. Back in the old days, miners would head out into the bush and travel for days, if not weeks, maybe even months in some cases, to get to a certain spot so they could drive their stakes into the ground. And then they had to race to the nearest recording office to record the claim. If someone else recorded that ground before you did, they would get it. Today, it's all done online, and the claims are good for a year. There is a fee for registering a claim, and each year there is a fee for keeping the claim. You can work the fee off by doing exploration, digging some holes, doing some test panning, maybe digging a trench, running your sluice box for a while. it isn't always as rewarding as you might think in the gold sense. But this is the nature of the beast. You have to be prepared to go out there and pay your dues. There are people who've gotten lucky in the past. Bill Barley told a story years ago about 3 English greenhorns who showed up, I believe it was out in the Kootenays. And they came in late one night, attracted by a set of prospectors, real prospectors, campfire light, and stumbled into camp and were so green, the first thing they wanted to know from these fellas was, where's the gold? So sarcastically, these fellas, and this is a well-known story, told these guys, they pointed way off in the distance to this far-off mountain and said, you got to go around the other side of that mountain there, just to get rid of them. Well, these guys went over there and found gold by the bucket loads. Which just goes to show you, you never can tell. But for the most part, it's just about the fun. If you do any better than that, well, that's a bonus. But you know, there's always the dream. It's kind of like buying the lottery ticket, but unlike buying the lottery ticket where you just sit around and wait to see if someone calls your number, you actually get to go out there and participate hands-on and learn a skill set and how to recognize minerals and rocks and all that great stuff. So when I say it's good entertainment for the family and good exercise and whatnot, I'm absolutely telling you the truth. It's in fact darn hard work. But you know what you get these days without doing any darn hard work? Yeah, that's right. You get to be a big old couch potato. And pretty soon people are telling you if you don't smarten up, you're not going to live that long anymore. And that makes you think, well, geez, how do I get out of this mess? Well, maybe you won't make yourself an Olympic athlete, but you know how to get yourself onto the highway and read a road map and go down to the river and use a shovel. That doesn't take a big education. And what do you know? Next thing you know, you've spent some time. Everybody's feeling good about getting out of Dodge. And you come back home thinking, well, maybe next time I'm going to look over there a little ways. I saw something I thought I liked on the way in. All kinds of little diversions to take, and it'll fill up the rest of your life. My friends, Dave and Rory, my prospecting buddies, and I started talking about this a couple of years ago. We'd always thought about it. I'd been licensed prospector since the mid-'80s. And I got to say that my buddies kind of led me back into it a little bit because they were keen on going and seeing if we could find anything. And so I said, okay, well, let's start with this then. And we started to look around, and before you know it, we'd picked up a claim down the southern end of Vancouver Island in the hills outside Souk, and we're still going today with 15 claims. Not 15 productive claims, but in the future, each of them possibly worth their weight in gold. There are areas of the province, of course, that are notorious for gold, and that's where you want to go. There's no point in going where gold hasn't been found before. Unless you're awful smart and awful lucky, you're better off to go in the vicinity of where gold has been found, turn over a few boulders, dig a few holes, get yourself deeper into the bush perhaps than anybody else did back when, because you can now, because there's roads. And before you know it, you're up on a hill, your foot slips on some moss, and you're looking at a vein of gold? Don't think it can't happen. It has happened. It will happen again. It could happen to you. I'd be delighted if it did, and I'd be delighted if you got your start because you turned in to a prospector as a result of listening to Gulf Island Radio and a little show called Heart of Gold. So as we continue on with Heart of Gold in the next few episodes, we're going to discuss more about what it takes to become an amateur prospector, what kind of gear you'll need, what kind of gear is good, what kind of gear is not really worth the money they want for it, how to get yourself out there with the least amount of dough involved, but with the best equipment you can find, and hopefully armed with enough knowledge that you'll know where to go look, and Next thing you know, we'll be talking to you. You'll be saying, you know that Heart of Gold, those guys, they got me going, and look at me now, I'm on the stock exchange. Well, speaking of the stock exchange, we promised to talk about this Brexit thing, the United Kingdom moving out of the euro. And what's that going to do to the price of gold? Well, it already did. It jumped significantly today, and I believe it will continue to do so. People are uneasy holding the volumes of American cash they have previously held so tightly. Especially overseas, our foreign debt to the American foreign debt to China, for one, has dramatic implications on the American culture for the future. They want to get that money out of China, which they were not allowed to do in the past and just are now, over $30 trillion in savings. And they want to invest it around the world in things that will change their lifestyle over the long term.
And Drew, I want you to comment. It's okay, they can hear me. I want you to comment on gold as a safe haven and why people should be interested in gold and how prospecting is really like the bottom rung of the gold ladder.
Oh, well, I think you just told us exactly what you needed to know. Yes, a safe haven, well, forever and ever, gold has been a safe haven, as has been silver, as have been diamonds. Some easier to find and get than others, depending on where you are. People now are moving towards savings in precious metals. They are not comfortable with paper currency, fiat currency as it is called. They are not sure that it's going to hold its value, and when it doesn't hold its value, gold does. So, this is where we're headed. It's been coming for a long time. It's going to take a while, but before you know it, gold is going to start going up rather dramatically, and it will have exponential increases as it goes along.
As will the value of gold claims.
Well, that's right. Us lucky prospectors who are out there happily minding our own business in the woods can look forward to better returns as our claims become worth more, as gold in the ground becomes worth more. So, think about this. Think about getting yourself a couple of books. I really recommend 2 volumes by Rick Hudson, a field guide to gold, gemstone, and mineral sites of British Columbia within a day's drive of Vancouver. That's Volume 2. And the original Volume 1, Rick Hudson's Field Guide to Gold, Gemstone, and Mineral Sites of British Columbia, Vancouver Island. Both excellent books and a lot to learn from Mr. Hudson. I am thoroughly happy I've got these. I can't tell you how valuable they are, both to me and my friends, as I try to explain to them just what all this whole prospecting thing is about. Now, Heart of Gold is brought to you by bcgold.com. bcgold.com is my friend Dave Anthony's company. It deals in gold claims, placer mostly, some mineral claims. Placer, as you recall, is the loose stuff on the surface that has been moved from its original source by glaciation or water. Mineral claims are hard rock, have to blast, have to dig them out of the solid ground. We'll get more into that on episode 3 of Heart of Gold next week, so I do hope you will join us for that. In the meantime and in between time, happy prospecting. Keep your eyes open. You never know when the next gold nugget is going to come your way. Thanks for joining us. I'm Drew and Dave here on Gulf Island Radio and Heart of Gold, brought to you by bcgold.com. See you next time, fellow prospectors. Welcome to Heart of Gold, brought to you by bcgold.com. The history of BC is the history of gold. Prospectors, and adventurers alike from around the world moved to this part of the country specifically because of the mineralization in this province and still are today. Tune in next week for another exciting episode of Heart of Gold on Gulf Island Radio, brought to you by bcgold.com.